This week on Quadriga, after the Houla-Massacre, pressure on Assad mounts. The killing of 108 people in the Syrian region of Houla has triggered outrage. The massacre was apparently carried out by government forces using heavy weapons. President Bashar al-Assad is increasingly isolated. How much longer can he remain in power? As Western capitals expel Syrian diplomats, is there any chance of a negotiated solution? And as UN observers can do little to help, will the rebels take revenge? Your host on today's show is Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Could the massacre in Houla be the turning point in the Syrian uprising, or is it just another atrocity condemned by the international community? That's what we want to talk about on today's show, together with my three guests. Michael Stürmer is the chief correspondent for the German daily Die Welt. A political historian, he's a specialist in foreign affairs and security issues. Sergej Sumienny is the Germany correspondent for the Russian business weekly Expert. He has also worked as a producer in the Moscow bureau of the German broadcaster ARD. Salam is a lecturer at the Free University of Berlin. Originally from Syria, she's focusing on global affairs and economic change in the Arab world. Thank you all for being here. Salam Said, Kofi Annan, Special UN Envoy Kofi Annan, has called the massacre in Houla a tipping point. Would you agree that Syria now, after this horrendous massacre, is at a turning point, that it perhaps even marks the beginning of the end of the Assad regime?
This is anyway, it is a tipping point. For example, the people in Syria are very depressive because the international observation mission couldn't help people against the violence of the regime. Internationally, we saw that it is really a tipping point because a lot of countries expel the ambassadors. Syria suffering under isolation internationally. It is a tipping point, but it is really not far away from the beginning of the end of Assad regime, as long as Russia and Iran and other China behind Syria or supporting the regime.
Well,
yes.
Sergej Sumienny, Salam Said is saying it is not the beginning of the end for the Assad regime as long as Russia still supports it. And, of course, the signals from Moscow indicate that it will continue to do so, even despite the massacre in Houla. But do you think there are some voices and sentiments within Russia now that are feeling that they might perhaps be on the wrong side of history?
I think I doubt can happen something in Syria that can really change the public opinion in Russia. Because, you know, the Russian media speak very little about the situation in Syria. They say, well, there are some problems and there is something like a little civil war, and the Western countries criticize Assad regime. But normally the people in Russia say, well, it's another Arabic country where the Western countries try to change the regime. And I think that this killing will change nothing in Russian public opinion, because even those people who know about it, they say, well, we don't know who has done it. The Western media say that Assad regime has done it, but who believe to the propaganda in Western media, etc., etc. I have read some blogs in Russian internet. They say that, well, it is well known that Assad regime cannot do this. It is well known, they say well known, that that was opposition who has done it to bring some more support in Western countries. So I think that the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov will do the same thing that he has already done and he is doing right now. And Russian public opinion doesn't care about what happens in Syria.
Well, Michael Stürmer, Russian public opinion doesn't care, says Sergej Sumienny. Certainly the Western public opinion does care about what has happened. Western governments have taken drastic measures. They have expelled Syrian diplomats. How significant is this step?
I wouldn't call it drastic measures. It's cutting off communication lines, which is not always the wisest course to take, because you want to exert pressure on the regime, and then you need an interlocutor. If you chuck him out of the country, you have no interlocutor except through intelligence lines and private contacts. So this is not going to be a game changer. The Middle East has seen massacres, especially in Syria. Hama in 1981, something between around 20,000 people were killed, and nobody gave a damn in the Western world or on the Eastern side. Why Russia? I think that the Russians, especially Putin, is very much aware of the fact that in the Mediterranean basin, Syria is the one and only ally left. The Russians have, from Soviet Union to the present day, always kept Navy support base on the Mediterranean coast. They have recently invested a lot of money. They don't want to lose that, and they think they can sit it out.
And certainly Russia is the main arms supplier to Syria.
Well, yes, but more important is probably Iran. Russia is far away, and you have yes, Russia is, of course, sending arms. More important is Iran, because they also obviously send volunteers, in whatever meaning of the word, volunteers, training, active fighters, so and instructors, of course, and they know something about torture and sort of killing people. So Iran plus Moscow.
And Salam Said, the U.S. is even saying the massacre bears the hallmarks, the fingerprints of Iran. The massacre in Houla bears the fingerprints of Iran. What is the assessment within Syria?
I don't think that Iran is behind the massacre, but Iran, of course, support the regime by logistic support through telecommunication, for example, technology, and in this part, and also, as you said, that's with training for the armed forces of Syria and so on. Iran playing a very important role in Syria against the uprising, but in this massacre, it is really difficult to say if there is Iranian fingers there. I want to say something to Russian rule. It is not surprising that the public or the Russian civil society is not really interested or doesn't know a lot of things about what's happening in Syria. As long as Russia is not an undemocratic country, the media is also controlled in Russia, and there is no free opinion and so on. So it is really too much expected from the Russian people that they to support the Syrian people if they themselves are suffering under an authoritarian regime.
Are the Syrian people feel that the Annan plan is all but dead?
Yes, almost all the people. Were very optimistic about the Annan plan, but unfortunately, now not.
Well, the Syrian people weren't the only ones who were initially optimistic about the Annan plan, but as we have seen, due to the massacre in Houla, it seems to be all but dead. But it's not the only diplomatic initiative out there. Many other countries are putting forth several proposals to solve this dilemma in Syria. Let's have a look.
Kofi Annan has tried to negotiate peace. But in Damascus this week, the international mediator said the Assad regime was ignoring his efforts to end the bloodshed. The patience of Western governments is wearing thin.
To get the message across to them that they have to choose, that time will run out for the Annan plan, and that they have to make the choice of what they are going to do.
Many Western countries have expelled Syrian diplomats, a sign of outrage at the Houla-Massacre. The French president has even raised the possibility of military action.
We cannot exclude military intervention if it's done in accordance with international law, which means following a resolution by the Security Council.
But the use of force is opposed by the U.S., China, and Russia.
We should all act responsibly and not add fuel to the fire. Instead, we must put the fire out and get the parties back to the negotiating table.
Yet as the fighting goes on, the Syrian regime must be wondering how much longer it can count on support from its allies.
Well, Michael Stürmer, we just saw François Hollande saying that he does not exclude military intervention in Syria. What do you make of that?
Well, that was a kind of a pious wish, but no more, because he added that it must be done in accordance with international law, which means you have to have the Russians on board, the Chinese on board, even the Germans you have to have on board, and they were conspicuously absent in the Libya affair. So even if your closest friends are not reliable, how can you count on countries like China and Russia who have their own agenda and who have their own view of human rights or how dangerous human rights can be? I think it is no more than a kind of well, he wanted to present himself as a humanitarian politician, not in the old traditional mold. I don't think it means anything.
So
in
hollow
real
words
terms.
then?
How?
Hollow words? Empty words then, is what you're saying?
Hollow words, yes.
Okay. Sergej Sumienny, we've seen the pressure on Russia is mounting, the diplomatic pressure, at least verbally. Do you feel that Moscow is running the course and running the danger of isolating itself in the long run? And does Russia even care?
Oh, they don't care, of course. Why the hell should they care? Russia has been criticized on very different cases since years and changed nothing. Look, if you look at Mr. Putin, who is our new president, he observes Europe. Europe is weak. Europe doesn't know what to do with Greece. Europe doesn't know, Germany doesn't know what to do with France. France doesn't know what to do with Frau Merkel. Should I, says Mr. Putin, should I care about what they say there? They don't know how to run their own house. And of course, he feels to be right, because he watches on the other Arab regimes, like in Egypt, like in Libya, and he says, well, it is always the same agenda. Some people start to protest, and the Western countries try to support them, and then the regime fails, and then the Western countries say, well, we don't know what to do now. And he says, well, they want maybe... it is really a very, you must know, it is really a very popular idea in Russia. Many people, even in government, they don't say it for propaganda. They really believe in these ideas. They think that the Western tries to train itself in some uprising missions. They really think that the Western diplomats train their diplomatic machines to organize uprisings. And they really think, and I have spoken to many Russian bureaucrats who really believe in that. They say the new American ambassador, Mr. McFaul, has come to Russia as a specialist in organizations of uprisings. And they say, well, if we support Syria, we just help the Western diplomats to finish another one training mission. And the next mission will be Russia. They believe in that. And of course, they will be always against the Western agenda in this case.
Well, Salam Said, from everything that Sergej Sumienny has been saying, we cannot expect a change of course and direction from the Russians anytime soon. But perhaps there might be a danger lurking for Assad from within Syria. Shopkeepers, the merchant class, have been boycotting, have been on strike for some time. The economy, of course, is doing very badly. Do you think that might perhaps even pose a greater threat to Assad in the long run than any outside intervention?
Yes, I believe that the Syrian people could solve the problem by themselves, because unfortunately Syria became a place of struggle of many international and regional interests, and in this case it is really very difficult to have the cross point where all interests of regional and international partner reached, and for this reason Syrian people now are very pessimistic about the international solution, and they want to do it by themselves. That will take a lot of time, because, as I said, Syria become financial and technical and political diplomatic support from Russia, Venezuela a little bit with oil, Iraq supporting Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon politically, Iran and Russia and China and of course, in some extent. That means Syrian regime could stay a little bit on the power for a while. We don't know when this regime will collapse, but hopefully this collapse is coming.
Michael Stimmer, many more people have died in Syria than in Libya. Of course, in Libya, the international community intervened. In Syria, it does not. Many Western diplomats are saying two very entirely different cases. Syria, a much more complex case. Do you think the Syrian people on the ground care about this, care about the complexity, if you will?
Who is the Syrian people? I think there are several groups, strong minorities. It's a very diverse people, if it's one people. There's a minority rule by the Alawites. There are the Sunnis who have seen all around them some religious civil war. So it's an extremely complex situation. Take Ehud Barak, the well-informed Israeli Minister of Defense, who really knows something about the Arabs. And he said a year ago, in a year's time, everything will be over and forgotten. Well, that's where we are not. That is point one. Who is the Syrian people? Of course, the rebels claim that they are the people. Any rebel group has always claimed that they are the people, but they are not. They are part of the people, and it's a very divisive situation. The other thing is, this is not, in fact, not Libya, and the Syrian army is not the Libyan army. The Libyan army was predominantly trained to keep the other tribes, not the Gaddafi, but the other tribes, down. It was a third-rate army. Here you have a very different military situation, and this will not be a walkover. This will be an endless engagement. You know where you start, and that would be very difficult enough, but you don't know where you end. It's a high-stakes game with uncertain outcome.
Salam Said, of course, Michael Stimmer has alluded correctly to the very diverse Syrian nation. And we do see that the opposition is not really united. And more importantly, perhaps, they have failed to muster the support of other minorities, such as Christians, Alawites, and the Kurds.
This is the first part of the question is right. This is people or the opposition are ununited, and it is a bad thing in one point of view, but it's a good thing in another point of view. It is normal. It's very healthy if the opposition haven't one opinion, but it's bad that they couldn't union or have the same idea how or and when want to play against the regime or to gather in one front, let's say like this. Annan plan was a very good chance that to union all these opposition groups. Before Annan plan, the groups were fighting about how want to change the regime. Some of them want to have a military intervention. Some of them them. They said no, we want just to have the political solution. Annan plan came, and everyone support this plan, even those who wanted to have a military intervention before. And now with the unsuccessful Annan plan, that means we will go to the point zero again. We will struggle again, and so on. The second part, I don't think that you can say this diverse the opposition. You cannot divide it by ethnical and religious backgrounds. If every group of opposition has all Syrians, Christian, Druze, Alawite, and Sunni. If you look at the business community, Sunni business community is the most important supporter for the regime over years. Even in this crisis, you cannot say that the Alawite are alone, the only group of the people, Syrian people, who are supporting the regime. And you cannot say the only opposition are the Sunni people. No, from all groups, ethnical and religious groups, there are people who are pro-Assad and anti-Assad.
Sergej Sumienny, many Western nations, certainly the U.S., are fearing. They are very much determined and supportive of the fact that Assad needs to go, but they are very much concerned about what comes after Assad. Certainly, Michael Stürmer has already suggested that jihadis, the al-Nusra Front, as well as Al-Qaeda even, are already in Syria in the mix of it all. Is that also, does that play a part in the Russian consideration?
Yes, of course. It is a big part of Russian considerations, and it is a big part in considerations of people who do not belong to the Russian government. Because Russian government, the first idea of Russian government is what I have said already. They are afraid of their own future. But the Russian intellectuals, the Russian scientists, the Russian politicians who are not part of Russian political establishment, they say, well, they are free of that fears, and they say, well, okay, we agree that Assad is bad. We agree that the country needs a change. But look, we have no resources. We have no to organize it. We have no ideas how to organize it. And they say, okay, a bad dictator, a bad regime is better than a jihadist Islamistic chaos. And they say, look at Libya, look even at Egypt. In Egypt, it started very peacefully, but look who came to the power, look what happens to Christian church in Egypt, etc., etc. And of course, that people who cannot be blamed to be pro-Assad because they have some dictatorship interests in preserving Assad regime. They really don't know what will happen after, and they say, well, we'll have to conserve the situation. Of course, killings should be stopped, but please don't take Assad away because he is bad, but he is the last person who can keep the country from chaos.
Michael Stürmer, the conflict's been going on for almost 15 months now. Many have thought that it would have been over by now. Has the international community underestimated Assad?
Well, first of all, the international community, whatever that means, it's a pretty brittle concept. The international community has always talked about the Arab Spring. Now, one thing is for sure that from Mauritania, Morocco to Syria and Yemen, these are very different sorts of seasons, and some are more successful than others in democratic terms. We know too little. And withdrawing our ambassadors from there doesn't add to our knowledge, but it adds to our ignorance. We know too little, and that's another reason why it is very dangerous and loose talk to say we must intervene. Somebody has got to intervene. Perhaps not me, but my neighbors have got to intervene in a situation which is, to put it mildly, opaque. You don't know what you meet once you are in, and you don't know what happens tomorrow and whether the victors of tomorrow will be much better I still think that the Annan plan was a blueprint for some compromise solution, but even the Annan plan would have needed foreign boots on the ground to keep the peace, because this is an ongoing civil war with very, very ugly elements, very complex intervention on the part of Iran, how to keep things apart and sort out who is who and bring in some new order. Very difficult to imagine, and I think it by far exceeds the organizing, the management power of outside forces.
Salam Said, it seems very unlikely now, but when Bashar al-Assad became president, there was actually widespread hope in Syria, wasn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, he was a Western-educated doctor along with his Western-educated wife. What went wrong?
Actually, he was really a hope for all people, especially young people. And but the problem, he started with his liberalization politic in economics, and he promised also a lot for political reform and so on. People who really start to be active in political and economic sectors, they directly noticed that these promises were only promises on paper. So this is not real promise. There is not real willing to change. And for example, the economic liberalization led only to have a new business community or business class, which are very good related to the governors, to the family of Assad. His cousin Makhlouf, for example, he is the head of the empire of communication sector in Syria. The other cousin is in other sectors and so on. They built a kind of mafia, and they're working like a mafia actually in Syria, politically and economically. This is why everyone was upset about the Al-Assad in the reality.
You see, history shows that the most dangerous moment for a tyrannical regime is when it wants to improve itself, when it wants to reform itself, to get off the tiger's back. And here, this obviously failed. Assad Jr. did make the right noises, and everybody was a little positive and optimistic, and then he had to put on the brakes of his own will, because other groups, the generals, the intelligence services told him, you are playing a very dangerous game, be careful, we are the Alawites, we are a minority, if they get us, they'll butcher us, so we better stop everything. This is probably the dynamics which were unleashed by young Assad, who was in fact trained as a dentist in London and should have remained a dentist, then he would be out of trouble. But then the situation would probably be the same. It's not a personal wickedness of Assad, it's just the ruthlessness which you have to display and exercise if you are a Middle East dictator, or if you are a dictator anywhere in the world.
Let me criticize something with simplifying the way how to see the conflict in Syria. It is not the conflict of Alawite and minority and majority. Look at, for example, Egypt. Look at Tunisia. They have, from the socio-economic background, the same problem. All people, for example, Mubarak family has also the same behavior all these years. They have the economic liberalization, but they take advantage of this liberalization, or their friends or their relatives. The same has happened also in Tunisia. So Syria is one country of the MENA region which suffered under this let us means or this kind of liberalization. Yeah.
Well, Syria, Michael Stürmer is saying Assad should have stayed a dentist in London. Of course, we know he has not. Quite the contrary. And there is a dilemma. He's now the president, remains to be the president, and various solutions are being sought to solve this complex issue, including one solution that are circling around the diplomatic circles, which might prove to be successful. Let's have a look.
Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh was unseated by a popular uprising that split the country's armed forces. Saleh initially clung to power, and many rebels were killed. But under an agreement brokered by the Gulf Cooperation Council, he stepped aside at the end of last year. Elections were held in February, and Saleh made way for a new president. The step-by-step transfer of power, backed by a political process which aims to bring together different sections of the population, could be a model for Syria.
Yemen shows that a political solution is possible, that political change is possible. This should be an example to other countries. Peaceful change can happen.
As part of the transition deal, Saleh was granted immunity from prosecution, though many Yemenis think he should stand trial. And violence has continued in the country. Some fear it could degenerate into a failed state. Those are the features of the Yemen experience that the West would not want to see repeated elsewhere.
Well, Sergej Sumienny, the so-called Yemeni solution was not rejected outright by the Russians, from what I understand. Is that something that you perhaps could imagine working out as a solution agreeable to all parties, including the Russians?
Well, the idea that the former dictator or former president or former authoritarian ruler is granted immunity, and that is the deal when he leaves and new politicians come to power, is of course very interesting. And it is actually it is what we have done in Russia when Boris Yeltsin left his office. He was not a dictator, but there were some concerns about if he was corrupted or not. And new President Vladimir Putin said, well, Boris Yeltsin is granted immunity, and it is the main stone in the fundament of Russian democracy. So, of course, you can say, well, Bashar al-Assad is granted immunity and he leaves. But there is always, and Egypt has shown that this solution is not perfect, because there is always a moral hazard in this solution. You can grant immunity to a dictator who has only stolen some $100 million of US. You can grant immunity to a dictator who has only suppressed some demonstrations and put some 100 people under arrest. But how can you argue for a solution? You have to grant an immunity to a dictator who has killed some 100 people. I don't know very good the position of the people who are relatives of killed, but I think that there are hundreds and thousands of people who say, no, this is not a solution. He has killed our brother, father, sister, mother, I don't know who, third great nephew, and we will not agree it. And you can look at Egypt. Even Hosni Mubarak, he was said, well, we grant you immunity, but this has not worked. This hasn't worked. And I think that Russians would say, okay, we are for this decision, but I'm not sure that when you will come to a negotiation table, you can really negotiate the rules of this immunity.
Well, the sweet voice of realpolitik tells me maybe it is better that one of those dictators gets away with his deeds then another 100,000 people are being killed. You don't know. It's an open engagement.
Of course.
So ultimate justice, of course, in these situations is probably theoretically and practically impossible. What you want to see is an end to bloodshed and an end to suppression. And if that can be achieved, even at the cost of letting off a man like Assad, so be it.
Would you agree? I mean, the Yemeni option would indeed see Bashar Assad go into exile and someone else takes over.
Be a dentist.
Yeah.
Be a dentist somewhere. hopefully not Berlin.
I wouldn't go there.
Yemeni model was suggested many times. This is not the first time. The regime didn't accept this solution and will not accept this solution. The regime feel strong, and the regime want to keep the power. That's one point. The second point, the president is not only the regime. The regime is not only the president and his family. There is a lot of people who are involved in this regime and are part of the regime. About the people, I think people in Syria are very they fear of the bloodshed of a civil war, for example, or from this militia of the regime. They are uncontrolled, for example. It's not only from the Islamic conservative, the Shabiha, for example, are not controlled. They don't really control them, and this is the big challenge for the era after Al-Assad. I don't think that Al-Assad will accept any solution like Yemeni, hopefully with a lot of pressure.
Perhaps he would, but what happens to his cronies?
Of course, and you're right, it would be the most rational solution. It would mean stop of killings, stop of bombardments. But once more, people do not always act rational. And look at Greece, look at other countries. People do not come to the most rational solution. They say, we have right, we want to win. We will continue fighting.
If Russia put more pressure on the regime and said, we will not support you if you don't accept the Yemeni model, maybe the regime will accept the Yemeni model.
You still have China.
Yeah, but China hasn't really a very important rule like Russia.
And you still have Iran, of course.
Yes, of course, Iran.
Well, and Iran will fight to the last man in Syria.
And of course, don't forget that if you grant immunity to Mr. Assad, if you grant immunity to his wife, if you grant immunity to all ministers, you will always have thousands of officers, thousands of unofficial officers, thousands of people who have already killed. They have blood on their hands. You cannot grant immunity to everyone in country who has killed.
Yeah.
Yes, of course not. But you can. We can talk about transitional justice, for example, how to catch these people or to know. I think of Germany, for example. Until now, there is people who are from Stasi, and now they could be arrested or be maybe isolated, at least socially, and maybe this could be happen in Syria in 10 years or in 20 years. It doesn't matter. The most important point is that the regime step down. The president would have to step down.
What about the Truth and Reconciliation Committee?
Like in South Africa.
Like in South Africa, which has helped. In fact, this solution has now lasted for the better part of 2 decades. And it looked almost impossible from the start. It was a very, very courageous decision on the part of the main actors. Well, you have to have a package deal, and that would be part of an Annan package deal, which I think still has a chance. Exchanging the dictator doesn't mean exchanging the regime. Yeah. But at least it would help.
But certainly the news that former Liberian President Charles Taylor was sentenced to 50 years by the International Court of Justice certainly is probably not an incentive for President al-Assad to go into exile, because at the end of the day, history can always catch up with you. I want to just talk about the geopolitical ramifications in Syria just for one more second. Is Michael Stürmer's Syria perhaps just a platform for a bigger and more concise and concrete, if you will, duel between Shiites and Sunnis that are going on right now?
It's at present, it's the point of confrontation. It's a kind of central front in a much broader conflict in which you have the Saudis and the Egyptians to some extent on the one side.
And the Qataris.
And part of the Qataris, the upper class. And the lower class, the people who do the work, the daily work, are of a different shade. And also Saudi Arabia is anything but homogeneous, Wahhabite, Sunni. They have a big Shia population, and the Shia population is lives exactly where the oil is. So all these situations are much less clear than when they appear on the map and you have borders. These borders mean very little, and they mean ever less in the present situation. Yes, Syria could turn out, if the conflict continues and perhaps escalates, could turn out to be the turntable of a very nasty major war.
Sergej,
a mix of war and civil war and religious war.
Sergej Sumienny, do you foresee any changes in the Russian position for some time to come?
Of course, there can happen some changes, but Russia will be the last country who will change its view. It should happen really something really terrible in Syria to help Russia to change its view.
Michael Stürmer, where do you see this headed? It's been going on for 15 months now. Diplomats are scratching their heads over what to do. What would your advice be? How to solve this problem? I know if you had the answer, you'd be
pursue
$1 million man.
Pursue as long as you can the Annan plan, add elements to it, keep open channels of communication, and stay out militarily.
Stay out militarily, says Michael Stürmer.
Yeah,
Salam
I agree. Maybe
agree?
Also to raise the observation mission in Syria to 1,000, for example, to put pressure to get more humanitarian help and more, for example, investigation commissions to investigate in all the crimes.
Are the people in Syria, are they starting to lose hope?
Yeah, somehow, yeah. A part of them, yes. But a part of them, they are more anger because of the anger. They are more, wanted to continue the revolution.
Well, the revolution will continue. The uprisings will continue 15 months into it. President Assad still remains very much in charge, also due to the Russian support. We will see how this conflict will play out for some time to come. I suspect this was not the last program we did on Syria. I want to thank you all for watching, and looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.